Contention. Critique. Conjecture. Conclusion.
The Huddle with corporate cars, saving you thousands on luxury European vehicles.
Cameron Slater from Whale Oil is back with us. Hello, Cam. Good to talk to you.
Good to talk to you.
And Josie Pagani is back with us also. Hello, Josie.
Hi, Larry.
Josie, issue number one to you. The legal highs. The law will be changed to ban all legal highs in the marketplace until the peddlers of these drugs can actually prove they are safe. Peter Dunne has changed his stance. Under pressure, I suspect the Prime Minister may have had a word here, but anyway, he maintains Cabinet signed this off last Tuesday. Slow to act, what do you see in this?
Yeah, I mean, it's never made any sense to me why this legislation was in two stages, Larry, because why didn't they just take all the products off the shelf, wait till they got the testing regime right, and then test everything and put it back on the shelf? So this is a big U-turn for Peter Dunne, who, you know, let's face it, He's often, he's known for having principles, but if you don't like them, he's got others. So he tends to kind of go wherever the wind is. And John Key's clearly stepped in. But the other thing, though, which I think is interesting, is that there's been a lot of politicking going on. And yes, Labor can take credit for pushing this, but I remember when Jim Anderton first introduced this legislation actually in 2004, and you know, God, he's a guy who would ban Coca-Cola if he could. You know, he wants this stuff. He wanted legal highs off the shelf, but the problem is that the chemistry is constantly getting one step ahead of the law, and it's very difficult to ban the stuff.
Cam, I think the law that Mr Dunne has put forward, and in fact it's partway through, isn't it? Well, it's through. 120 out of 121 MPs voted for it, so everybody was in agreement pretty much.
Well, I think the law had some good merits to it. I think Josie is correct in saying that it was a little bit ham-fisted having a regulatory regime that was supposed to come in after the fact. But I think overall the law was in the right direction in terms of legalising something and attempting to control it. Now, what I found strange is that we had all of these laws that were put in place. We had endless debates about it for synthetic cannabis, but we've still got outside of the law natural or organic cannabis, so to speak, which is actually what people want to smoke. The only reason why they're smoking these synthetic cannabinoids is because they really don't actually want to deal with gang members. They don't want to deal with the criminal element, and this was a legitimate way for them to go to a store and pay for a legal product. Now, it seems to me that the easiest solution, if we're so up in arms about synthetic cannabis and all of the harm that it can do because of these weird and wacky chemicals that will just keep on changing, is bring natural cannabis into that same regime, and then we've got a situation like they have in Colorado where we've actually legalized it but with a framework around it that then allows us to control cannabis in the same way that tobacco and alcohol are controlled.
But that's an interesting point, because actually what this whole hoo-ha over legal highs, which, you know, is an awful yucky synthetic product, you're right, but what it's kind of shown us is that the bigger problem is alcohol, as you say, Cam. I mean, never mind the debate about legalising cannabis. Most young people are binge drinking and causing themselves harm through alcohol.
Well, we have the strange
So if you introduce cannabis, then you're going to have yet another regulatory framework. And, I mean, you know, if ACT Party had their way, we'd have them selling pee at the local dairy. You know, no legislation whatsoever.
You've got to regulate these things, but here's the strange situation we've got. We've got alcohol which is allowed to advertise willy-nilly. It's advertised on television, it's advertised in movie theatres. The stores that sell alcohol, which is a drug, a dangerous drug, which actually kills people,
yeah, exactly,
is able to be freely advertised. You go past any corner shop that's selling booze, and they're able to advertise it. Tobacco has to be hidden away, no advertising. We've got all of these regimes in place. And then we've got the synthetic drug regime, which is different. Why don't we just do it all together? If we're going to...
Well, yeah, look, I've heard the argument, the alcohol and the tobacco and all that sort of stuff, but I don't think alcohol in moderation causes stuff like seizures, psychosis, hallucinations, heart attacks and strokes. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, that's true, Larry, and that's why we allow alcohol. We don't allow dope, actually, whether it be natural dope or synthetic dope.
The same thing.
Well, I disagree with that. I think the medical evidence is actually more and more conclusive that it's very harmful.
The problem with that, Josie, is the medical evidence is predicated on investigations by scientists in the United States who are only allowed to study the bad effects of marijuana. They're not allowed to study the good effects.
Yeah,
and so you've got this overwhelming evidence about cannabis and how bad it is simply because federal legislation prohibits anybody looking at the good effects.
Well, anyway, coming back to the issue, which is the so-called legal highs, which are anything but, I believe that in a couple of weeks this stuff will be out of the marketplace, legally anyway, because the manufacturers will not spend $1 million to prove they're safe because we all know that they're not safe.
That's the problem, though, Larry, is that what will happen is that they'll go one step ahead and because you can't. It's like trying to ban crime rather than criminal acts. So they'll come back as something else. They'll come back as hairspray or glue or nail varnish or something.
Methamphetamine's already illegal and people are using it. Ecstasy is already illegal and people are using it. Other party drugs are illegal and people use them. This is simply going to push it underground, and they'll head to more readily available drugs, and again have to start dealing with the criminal element. And I think we're missing the point completely here because a few hand-wringing busybodies in some small towns have got upset.
We'll come back in just a moment. Cameron Slater and Josie Pagani on the Huddle. NewstalkZB, it's now 15 to 6.
Asking questions and waiting for answers. It's Larry Williams Drive with ANZ, the bank with more local experts. On NewstalkZB.
Back on the Huddle, Cameron Slater and Josie Pagani. Issue number 2 came to you as a register for convicted child sex offenders. Likely by the end of the year, it will not be made public. Should it be made public or not?
Well, in order to make it public, we need to really tighten up how we handle name suppression, which is still not handled properly in my view. The problem we have is that a number of these sex offenders have name suppression, and they're given name suppression in order to protect their victims. Now, the solution to that, of course, would be to bring in place mandatory name suppression of victims' details, and then we can name these sex offenders willy-nilly and get to know where these ratbags are living, and so that we can protect our communities from the predations of these guys. And by and large, most of them are repeat offenders. So I think it should be made public, and there has to be some element of punishment for these people, because most of the time they get name suppression, they do 18 months in jail, and then they're out and carry on with their lives.
What do you think, Josie?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pilot list of convicted child offenders, so they've served a prison term and they're coming out. So I thought the most interesting comment on this came from Deborah Coddington, who was the person who first introduced, she published a few years back now, she published a list of the names of
1996
sex offenders, and she got into big trouble for it. Now, she said that in retrospect she wouldn't do that again, that she doesn't see this, it's not a magic bullet. If the goal is to stop reoffending rather than to lynch offenders, then she would rather see something like this, which is not made public, so the police know where these rat bags live, as you say, Cam. And I want the police to have the resources to keep an eye on them. I don't want them driven underground.
Well, yeah, but here's the thing. So the police know about all this information. Actually, they probably know where these paedophiles are now. But so the public, somebody rings up the police and say, well, the police comply and say, yeah, look, yeah, you're right. The guy next door is a serial paedophile.
They can't say that because the Privacy Act would prevent them from doing that.
Yes.
So you've still got the case where these filthy paedophiles, convicted sex offenders, are basically doing as they please because nobody knows. If they have to go and live in Palmerston North or something like that, somewhere where no one else wants to live.
Well, what have you got against Palmerston North? No, look, but the thing is, there's good evidence to show, and this is what Deborah Coddington said, that, for example, first-time offenders can be rehabilitated. Now, the risk is that particularly, and I'm quoting Deborah Coddington here, that high-risk offenders will be driven underground and they're more likely to offend. So I want my kids to be safe. I want the cops to be given more powers to keep an eye on them and to monitor them, rather than whatever Cam thinks he's going to do with his his AK-47 or something.
No,
Okay, well,
behaviour is unacceptable in any way, shape or form, but there is a case here where some of these people are never going to be rehabilitated. But unfortunately, we've got these crim-hugging wombles like Kim Workman out there who think that these people just need a good cuddle.
Well,
but I don't see Kim Workman volunteering to house these people in his
if they won't be reoffended, then we have preventative detention now, which is exactly the kind of legislation that exists to say you go to prison, you stay there.
And how often do our crim-hugging judges ever give them preventative detention?
Well, that's why we have that legislation, and if it's not working, then we need to look at it. But it is working. I mean, there's sentences that the judges have no discretion, I reckon.
All right, very briefly, I see the serial litigant, what's his name, Graham McCready, is looking to take legal action against Murray McCulley and Shane Jones over this new positions being offered. Yeah.
Well, somebody needs to declare this guy a serial, a
vicious
litigant. He just had a case last week thrown out against John Banks, a second case that he had running. I've got a copy of the court judgment. The judge basically says this guy's an idiot. He has no evidence for any of these things.
He is an idiot, isn't he? I mean, I actually I was doing some research for a story on NewstalkZB website, and I clicked on the wrong story accidentally. It had a title saying serial harasser gets multiple parole conditions, and I thought that was a story about him, because he is a serial harasser. He's just, honestly, I'm so over the guy.
Well, he's using the court system to bully people who don't fit into his warped view of things. I think it's about time the courts took some action against him, stopped entertaining his grandstanding, and started slapping some serious costs on him.
Thank you, Cameron, Slater and Josie Pagani on the Huddle. It's 8 to 6.